And in the finance space, that shift, I think, has already happened, where in the past, your qualifications as an accountant would get you a job in finance and it would get you a seat at the table. Now, I think it's an entry point. You have to have all the strategic skills, the business partnering skills, the technology nous, to keep your seat at the table. And the same thing is going to happen in the technology space. You need to go on this journey, but you've got to remember what your value is. And it's not just about speed, because the AI is going to win every time.
Hello and welcome to Tech for Finance, where we help finance professionals leverage technology to level up their lives. I'm your host, Adam Schultzen, and today we have a special episode that's being broadcast as part of the Generation CFO Future Proofing Finance Academy event. Today we're speaking with Christopher Argent, founder of Generation CFO, a community that helps finance professionals adopt digital capabilities. With over 25 years of experience, Chris has led analytics, finance operations, and business partnering for major companies like Amazon and Vodafone, and is passionate about agility, analytics, and automation in finance. Through Gen CFO, Christopher provides research, events, and an online community to support finance innovation. He also hosts Digital Finance Function Awards, recognizing leading CFOs driving change through technology, and is also working on a book, The CFO Startup. I don't know whether you're near completion on that, Chris, but maybe we can pick it up in a bit, right? But when he's not empowering finance heroes, you can find Chris walking the Surrey Hills with his dog Evie, spending time with his young family, watching rugby, formerly playing, and on occasion donning his lycra and cycling. He's even cycled from London to Paris numerous times. But if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to Tech for Finance on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. But it's great to have you on, Chris, and it's great to be part of the Gen CFO Future Proofing Finance event. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. As a lovely introduction, a thorough introduction as well. I feel quite exposed. But yeah, it's great to have the personal side of life in there as well, because it's not all work. And thank you as well. I think what you're doing with your podcast is fantastic. It's a conversation we all need to be having more of. So thanks for partnering up on this today.
No, it's great. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, you're right. I mean, yeah, people forget that we are humans at the end of the day, and if we don't at least reference some of the stuff we like doing, we don't know who the people are behind the people, do we? So we're all good. So for people who have been living under a rock and don't know who Chris Argent is, can you just give a bit of a potted history as to your background and how Gen CFO came about?
Yeah, so a long career in a nutshell. I started out in finance, went all the way up through core finance to divisional FD of a medium-sized company. But it was at that point the life-changing moment happened. I discovered a fraud. My CFO was defrauding the company, and I had to deal with an awful lot of fallout from that. That affected me, professionally, but also personally, talking about the personal side of life. And after basically clearing all that up, I had fallen out of love with finance. I felt that I was very much part of a problem with finance, poor process, poor data, very low tech environment. And I needed to move out. So I moved into finance transformation, which made me feel for a while that I was part of the solution. Started working, as you say, in sort of big brand companies to lead finance transformation in FinOps and BI particularly. I've still got a deep love for BI and data viz and analytics. But then when that consulting career kind of came to an end about 4 or 5 years ago, I saw, the need to continue having conversations about this and set up Generation CFO. Started out as a LinkedIn group, grew into an offline community, and now it's all this great stuff that I'm doing now. And it's all about just getting people together to have, edge conversations, to learn from each other, because I believe that peer learning is super powerful.
And I was saying to your colleague before we started, my LinkedIn has blown up a little bit off the back of this event, because obviously we share quite a lot of connections, and we, I guess, speak in the same circles. So I've heard a lot of good feedback to date. Chris Ortega, Glenn Hopper from yesterday. They've been on the podcast before, so yeah, there's been some really good stuff going with the events that you're doing now. So it's great.
I really enjoyed that session. It was great to plug into America at the back end of the day, because they'd taken their coffee and fresh out of bed, so it kind of woke me up. And not just their attitude, what they were saying was fantastic. They are they're testing and they're learning all the time. They're great people, but they're also sort of great innovators, because they're doing a CFO role. It's more of a fractional CFO role in sort of smaller companies, so they have almost the need to learn this technology to enable their work, maybe where sort of large scale CFOs feel that it can be delegated, but they really are sort of trialing this stuff, and they've got great use cases and examples that people can use, particularly around Gen AI, which is obviously the hot subject at the moment.
Yeah, I speak with Glenn semi frequently. Always learning something new, and I remember when he came on the podcast, he'd just done his first FP&A tool created solely from the original ChatGPT. So this was back sort of maybe last Christmas time. And it's quite funny, and we'll probably touch on this during this conversation, but the pace of change, because no sooner had he gone through that exercise and spent a load of time, and again, I still don't know where he finds his time. I ask him all the time, and I'm still yet to get to the root of how he manages to do everything that he does. But no sooner has that come out that we've then got a next iteration, of GPT-4, and actually he could have done the same thing in 30 minutes as opposed to 3 days or whatever it happens to be. So it's bonkers the rate of change. And
it was funny.
I don't know how you feel about it.
It was funny. We actually had if you're listening to this and you didn't see it, go back and have a look at a session yesterday called LLM, the power behind AI chat. And it was basically a bit of a 101 around prompts technology and LLM, large language models, from an AI director at IBM, Armand Roos. But it was good on that point, because he basically said, look, here's the landscape of LLM right now. It's not just all about ChatGPT. There are probably about 50, 60 models on his slide. But he said by the end of this session, it will be out of date. Because the everything's changing so quickly. Everyone's trying to own a piece of this new, sort of economy, really, which is being created in front of us. And it's happening so quickly, right? ChatGPT is only a year or so old when it was launched on the world. The growth in users and the growth in use is phenomenal. So yeah, to your point about things changing at a pace. But it's been good for Glenn, because when people Google finance leader sort of ChatGPT, he's popped up on the list. So I think his speaking career has taken off in the US, which is great.
Yeah, a lot of time for Glenn. Yeah, and yeah, I should imagine it's a bit frustrating. I mean, I find it myself. So speaking openly and honestly, I've stepped off the gas or the accelerator a bit recently in terms of how deeply I'm diving into some of these tools, because being on the bleeding edge is so exhausting at the moment. I began to suffer, and I've been quite open and honest. I've had to have a bit of a rest over the past couple of weeks, just to do a bit of a rest and reset, because things just got a little bit too intense. But one of the examples is, not to hijack obviously the limelight from you, Chris, but I remember a few months ago I did a newsletter around it. But it's when OpenAI first introduced the concept of custom instructions, where you could go in and basically do the scenario and the profile you wanted it to adopt without having to type it as a prompt every time. I don't want this to be a conversation about prompt engineering either. But from
it's fine. I think we all need a bit of prompt coaching, so go for it.
So, but yet then at the same time, the limitation of the custom instructions is that you couldn't have multiple custom instructions. So it would only assume the one role of whatever the custom instructions were. So if you wanted it to assume a different role, you'd have to update the custom instructions. So I then started delving into some of these, I guess, agent platforms where you could train your own bot. So I ended up on MindOS. That was a pretty good one, and a couple of others, whereby you could train an AI with a base prompt. So you could, in theory, have multiple chatbots. Yeah, so you could have a finance formula bot. That's one that I tested. Maybe we talk about spreadsheets in a bit. But yeah, finance formula bot. You could have a decision support bot, and all of these sorts of things. And that cut out the need to obviously replace those custom instructions every time you wanted to talk to OpenAI. But now, and Christian Martinez, is he on for today, or was he on yesterday?
Yeah, no, he's talking today. We're having a chat. He's a rising star, and he won the Rising Star Award at the Digital Finance Function Awards that you mentioned earlier. So yeah, he's a great guy.
So I don't want to steal his thunder, because he did a really good LinkedIn post either yesterday or the day before. I think it was yesterday. And that was about the OpenAI updates that have come out, specifically around the next evolution of ChatGPT. So there will be a ChatGPT 4.5 Turbo, which is good, especially for developers, because I think it's going to be a bit cheaper than the API that's available at the moment. Yeah. But they've also introduced the concept of GPTs. And they're essentially similar to what I was speaking to before. You can train your own GPT, which is essentially an AI bot with custom instructions. Yeah. The only thing that I'd say there is obviously the GPTs with ChatGPT and OpenAI, you can only use obviously the OpenAI language model, whereas some of the other platforms like MindOS and Poe is the other one, POE. Yeah. You can choose the large language model you want to use. So to your point earlier about, there being a suite of large language models to choose from now, you can go and say, right, well, my preference is for Llama, or my preference is for Claude, or what your large language model of choice happens to be, right? But to come full circle, to stop me rambling, it doesn't necessarily negate or invalidate the work that I'd done a few months ago, because I think it was useful to people that were also on the bleeding edge with me at that moment in time. But I think to anybody else that is maybe new to this and not as invested as the likes of myself, Christian, I know Nicolas Boucher's just released his AI finance community as well. Or, if it's a struggle for me in terms of pace of change, I can only imagine what it's like to the day-to-day finance professional that wants to use this technology, but literally has no idea where to start. And it's difficult getting that balance of what to recommend that is more evergreen in terms of the concepts that aren't going to change, and the stuff that you can talk about but then is going to be irrelevant in a week.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it sounds like you've been on a hell of a journey, and I don't envy you. I think it's, you can go down a bit of a hole with these things, and they're fascinating. I think most people in accounting and finance, they're analytical. They have an analyst brain. So this whole world is kind of made for us if only we're curious enough. And I'm kind of hoping that people are curious. But you can go down holes. You can forget why you're doing it, and you can not consider the outcomes. Not consider what you're really trying to achieve. And when you go round and round in circles talking to people, looking in the tool or talking to people to try and, I don't know, make something amazing, because you feel that it's possible, then it's exhausting. You've kind of running a startup alongside your day job, all of a sudden. But the way that I would always sort of pitch this to people who are new to it, and it came out in the conversations yesterday, is have some kind of approach and stick to that approach, which I've always advocated. Find something tangible, something fairly small, something that is a clear outcome or objective for you and your team, even if it's a Friday project, because you can go mad with these things. And just try and nail that single thing, that point problem, because it could be, before we got on the call, we were talking about calendar management of all things, right? But someone's created an AI tool for calendar management. It's a point solution. Now they probably could have done 50 other things with that tool, but they didn't. They just focused on the one thing. So I think that's the real power of these tools. But yeah, I would sort of tread carefully and make sure it's a real specific outcome that you're going after.
Valid, really valid. Baby steps, incremental changes is often better than a big bang, because maybe we don't know what the big bang is, right? We might not have that complete solution, but at least we can get those quick wins to start freeing up time so that we can then spend that time more wisely. And this is where we can, I guess, start touching on some of the topics you and I discussed when we last had a catch up. Is I often find that when things get a bit tough or maybe expensive, and I don't want to tar finance with the same feathers across the board, right? But I often speak to people that will discuss, an ERP implementation, a finance implementation, or fill in the gap with whatever tool is most suitable, and then it will be we've had a thought about it, and actually we've got a workaround. We're just going to use spreadsheets instead, or whatever it happens to be. So, do you think that's still a threat? Do we think that they are still that comfort zone, and there's still a resistance to change based on the fact that the easier route is potentially, well, as I say, is that an easier route than treading the path less known?
I think you know the answer to that. Unfortunately, before I start, right, let me just say spreadsheets are good. Spreadsheets are ubiquitous. They're a one size fits all kind of tool. They're great as a utility tool. But there are limitations to using spreadsheets, and you're almost talking about a behavioral issue there, right? And I have had many Excel is dead kind of conversation, Excel battle, with that sort of thinking in mind. I have got nothing against spreadsheets and Excel, but what I do have a problem is this sort of over reliance on it as a tool, this sort of automatic thinking that comes in with finance people when it's like, look, I'll just export to Excel. I've got very, I don't consult anymore, but I did a bit, a couple of years ago, and people were downloading into Excel and then they were putting it into another tool rather than thinking about an integration. It's maddening. So I don't think Excel's going anywhere. I don't think spreadsheets are going anywhere. But I wish people would get a lot closer to the technology, whether it's advanced Excel or Gen AI. I don't really care, but just be a bit more of a sort of learned user so that they can, make a considered opinion whether to use it or not. Because it just seems to be the only way that some people work. And there'll be a lot of Excel MVPs out there saying, well, good, like it is a great tool and we should be using it. But I just feel that it's like, I don't know, only eating fast food, right? Or going to a buffet and eating all sorts, all your habits kind of go out the window when you go to a buffet. People are looking at, it as a tool that can do everything. Whereas actually, as we talked about just now about point solutions with AI, I'd rather a bit of fine dining more regularly than a smorgasbord of sort of okay food. So sorry, I'll probably push the analogy too far, but you know what I mean. I just don't think that we should be thinking only about spreadsheeting, and it does drive me mad a bit.
So there might not be a clear answer to this, and I'm not for a minute calling anybody old. It's my birthday in a couple of weeks actually, and I'm feeling a bit old. But do we think that there is an element of this that's generational? And do we think just by the nature of the fact that technology is becoming more accessible, that younger finance pros are more likely to adopt this tech? Do we think that it's inevitable that it will just, be used less and less?
You know what, it is a brilliant question, and I have thought about this for years, because I if we have the answer to this question, we know what to do next, right?
Hmm.
My personal view on this is that it's not generational. I think that you can have a transformational leader, you can have a geeky leader, you can have someone, a senior CIO who's, all over this stuff. In accounting and finance, they may not be those sorts of people, who are kind of digital first, but they do exist, and they can exist. And in fact, I opened yesterday with a story about one of our community members who is fantastic in this area, and he was partnering up with a graduate straight out from university doing astrophysics, right? And there's sort of like this great relationship. So the short answer is, I don't think it is generational. There is a problem here, though. I think it's actually hierarchical. So I think the further you go up in an organization, the traditional organization, the further away you are from making these decisions, from making change like this, from sort of understanding the power of it. And I think there is a tendency to delegate, and there's a tendency to sort of see it as someone else's problem. But I think that is slowly changing, where boards are more AI savvy than ever before, more data savvy than ever before. We've got a way to go, but I think boards are becoming, much more aware of the opportunity. So I would actually say it's probably more traditional hierarchical issue than it is generational issue. And the reason why I think that's the case is because when you actually look at agile organizations or growth organizations that have a slightly different structure, like your sort of series A, B, C's, startups, they don't operate in this way. They don't have the same problem. So yeah, it's a bit of a rambling answer, but and I'm certainly not standing up for the Luddites and the old people who don't want to do this. But I don't believe that it is generational. That said, I do think digital natives are going to absolutely lead this and accelerate it.
So, and again, this wasn't on the list of topics, but as you were speaking there, I'm sort of thinking about my own workflow in part in terms of my day to day, and the thing that came to me was the advantage of speed, especially for people that are time poor. So the example is, I've got a system, whether it's an ERP, a CRM, or a database with data, right? And I want to generate some sort of report or glean some sort of insight from that database, right? But I hit the limitation of the reporting tool, the native reporting tool that's in the ERP, the CRM system, or whatever. Now, because I'm all about speed, I know that I can just do a data dump, and I can create a couple of calculated columns, and within a few minutes, I can have the information that I need. Now, is that, and the reason I set that context is because I think to an extent, sometimes that behavior can evolve, because it will start as one export with a calculated column, and the next time around it'd be, oh, actually, no, I need to add that, and then you've got, all of these iterations of something that fundamentally should have just been a quick fix, but now has turned into a bit of a behemoth, right?
Yeah.
Is that learned behavior in my context that maybe I need to get rid of? So should my mindset instead be, don't go for the quick fix. If there's a reporting gap, you need to solve for that. Do you kind of hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So first of all, I'd say you need to decide what you're looking to do in terms of priorities, right? So if I need something to happen now, this is almost talking about the Eisenhower Matrix, right? Another thing we just touched on before this call. If I need something to happen now and it's really important, then I just need to get on with it. So if I'm going to just dump out into Excel and calculate something because I've got a board meeting or I need to find numbers, I am not going to discourage that behavior. But what I am going to encourage, which is good reporting practice or good data management or longer term solutions where, all these incremental gains add up to something fairly significant, which is kind of like a data driven environment or, enabling business partners to actually use reporting in a different way. So it's learned behavior. But it's only one behavior. So yes, I can download into Excel, but if I knew nothing about Excel, would I be thinking I should be able to link this to a data visualization tool? How do I integrate this? What sort of connections can I integrate immediately rather than just dumping it down? So I think it's this Excel thinking that I always, sort of try and kill off in the debates that I have. Nothing against the tool. It's the automatic thinking. And behavioral change is much harder than learning a bit of software, right? That's, much of my transformation career was on the change management side. It wasn't in the technical implementation. But the good thing is, and you talk about generations, I think this generation, I don't think there is a sort of generational gap here, but I think this generation just wants to use tech or solution in a very different way that people before have. And yeah, they might dump it out into Excel, but they might not even hear about Excel in a few years and just put it into a data visualization tool or, drop it into AWS or Azure and, start using a different front end. So I think it's changing, but you're talking about behavioral change here rather than technology.
And again, this has got me thinking. So with some of the businesses that I work with and have spoken to, especially in SaaS businesses, right? You've got this concept of OKRs, right? Objectives and key results, right?
Yeah.
So I've been trying to ingrain this as I try to become, a better manager, a better leader, because, a KPI and being able to monitor a certain metric doesn't necessarily push you on the path that, the business needs to achieve in terms of overall results, right? So again, coming back to AI, I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't put help me develop some OKRs into ChatGPT and it spit out a list, right? Not to use them verbatim, but obviously for inspiration, right? Yeah. But coming back to the reporting piece, I love the results that I got. There were some really interesting perspectives and some OKRs that hadn't occurred to me before. So again, that's a real advantage of having an AI assume a persona of somebody potentially more experienced than you that you can then validate, right? So there were some really interesting metrics that came out. I then looked at them and thought, how on earth am I going to report on those? Because you're into percentage increases and you're into, what an OKR is, right? I don't need to explain it.
Yeah.
Right? But my instant reaction from that more complex reporting is, right, well, how do I do that quickly? I just need the data and I need to be able to get out in some sort of format, right? So again, coming back to the subject of this conversation, maybe we just say, right, okay, well, figure out what we're solving for first, because the OKR is the ultimate deliverable, right? Maybe not go straight to the exporting the data and dumping into a spreadsheet and trying to work out how to calculate that percentage variance month on month, and then think about, is there a better tool for that? Should I have the time to investigate said tool?
But it depends, where's the value? Is the value in the speed of delivering on those KPIs, OKRs, or is it finding a new KPI? Yeah. Is it judging things in a different way? Because I think, using, let's say, using ChatGPT to kind of spit out a load of financial KPIs, because obviously this is a finance area.
Yeah.
That's going to happen, but that's just going to be textbook stuff. And there may be some other stuff in there that is referenced if you happen to sort of overlay, I'm in a retail company and I'm doing this and I'm that size or whatever. That's really helpful. But, what about the business knowledge that you have, the acumen that you have, your specific circumstances that you have, the combination of, AI should always be used as, the 98% of the effort, and then you're coming in with the extra 2. It shouldn't be the final answer. Yeah. And you're using all of your, if it can get you 98% of the way, and then you're adding in that 2% magic, that is AI working for me. So to use your example, if I go in and I say, what KPIs, what AKRs should I be running, then I will use that probably as a reference, but then I'll be saying, well, is there something else that I can use? To give a real example of this, so it actually came up in our podcast the other day. It's not all about the numbers, but we were looking at the.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Thanks. But it's about sport, so I apologize to people, but there was there was a game, and the team with all the KPIs being hit, tick, 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 even double or triple sometimes, had lost the game by 1 point, right? So all of that information was irrelevant. Basically, let's call it the output from ChatGPT was BS, because it didn't actually help you win the game in this instance. Then you find out afterwards that the winning captain, the winning coach, had actually, it's his own KPI, which was around selecting a team based on the impact that they make in between plays. So a new KPI. He also selected the team based on the weather. Yeah. So I think this is an example of where we can use our humanness and API together to generate extra value, to win a game or to win at business or whatever it is, rather than just using it for speed. Yeah, because actually the 2% might take you weeks to work out, whereas obviously the 98% from the AI is only taking you seconds.
And then you're into the category of that dude who knew what that specific KPI was. AI in the hands of that person who's got the experience as well. It's like you're almost taking it to another level, aren't you?
Well, it's the whole Moneyball film. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's like, if you can find the KPI, if you can cheat the casino, then all right, you're in a great place. But I suppose the reason why I raised that is because, yes, I believe in the power of the change, and I believe in what AI can do, but it's an enabler for us to do something else, to hit the outcome. And we started off talking about spreadsheet use. We've got to here, but but if I could use it, at some point in the future, there's going to be Copilot in Excel being used across the world. That everyone's going to have that tool. So is that really a competitive advantage at that point? No, it's going to be the people who can use it. Being a prompt engineer, but understanding how to use prompt properly, understanding how to apply your human knowledge to that very fast outcome, that is going to be the gain. And in the finance space, that shift, I think, has already happened, where in the past your qualifications as a accountant would get you a job in finance, and it will get you a seat at the table. Now I think it's an entry point. You have to have all the strategic skills, the business partnering skills, the technology nous, to keep your seat at the table. And the same thing is going to happen in the technology space. It's you need to go on this journey, but you've got to remember what your value is, and it's not just about speed, because the AI is going to win every time.
It's such a difficult question to answer, though, isn't it? As in, who am I? What skills can I bring to the table? What can I bring that nobody else can? And I'll put I'll drop a bit of a book recommendation if I may. It's called
Absolutely.
Meta Skills.
It's a learning event, so any tips?
Yeah. Yeah, so Meta Skills, 5 Talents for the Future. I'm not sure whether that's the full subject line. I'm trying to get up my Kindle here, but it keeps closing down really annoyingly. That's written by Marty Neumeier or something like that. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
But okay, Marty Neumeier, Neumeier. Yeah. So 5 talents for the future of work. And this was written before OpenAI AI released ChatGPT last November, right? I can't remember the exact date that the book was written, but he correctly identified the gap between humans that have the meta skills to bring to the table that are more than just robotic or acting as robots are the ones that are going to really be able, they're the ones that are going to differentiate themselves, right? And he tells the story about how the Industrial Revolution, just by way of the fact that it all revolved around efficiency, kind of turned people into robots. Yeah, because, people would be on a production line, they would have a number of units to produce, there would be a certain amount of regularity in their day, when it comes down to this, I will buy a car and then I will use that car and sit in traffic for 30 minutes until I get to the shop floor, and then I will carry out this set of jobs and then I will go home, right? That is fundamentally adverse to the way that we are naturally as human beings, where we are creative problem solvers and we want to be using our hands not for repetitive activities but our hands to create stuff, which is why the cover on the book is the 5 digits of the hands. And I won't go through what all the 4 meta skills are, but there's a lot around design thinking, and the whole principle of a meta skill is it's the skill that sits behind all other skills. So I'd really recommend it. It's been quite enlightening in my reading, but the reason that I mentioned that is because it's just got me asking more questions about who I am and the skills that I can bring to the table. Do you know what I mean? I can hold a decent conversation. I like to think that I bring the best out of people when I'm chatting to them. But then when I try and play that forward and think about my position in an AI world, I mean, you mentioned some content repurposing tools, before we started the podcast, right? It made my life easier. But at what point will the AIs be able to have a conversation? Do you see what I mean? And I think the sort of softer arts, whether it's podcasting, whether it's all of that sort of stuff, will maybe be some of the last to go. But for a finance professional that maybe does feel a little bit like a robot, and does spend their day, I won't suggest keying invoices because I think we're past keying invoices now. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, we're past keying invoices.
I don't know.
Well,
No, let's assume it's not.
But I think there is going to be an element of self-discovery that needs to happen. I think there will be a fundamental shift, and I don't know if you agree. And speaking to Anders on the podcast a few weeks ago, his Finance 5.0 then circles back to how do we add the human element back into finance? And it's one of the most difficult questions to answer.
Yeah, I kind of joke, we need to be careful not to turn into a very expensive Alexa, where we're just rabbiting, the AI output, right? Because there's no value in that. If the AI can do all this stuff for us, and we're purely the voice of it, then we're a very expensive Alexa. So we do have to be remembering what we bring to the table. And the meta skills sounds like a sort of good way of putting this, but it's about understanding the business. It's about connecting with the business. It's about sort of covering for the AI or working with the AI, being a bit of a fact checker there, being an advisor to the business, and maybe sort of intervening when they're using AI output and making sure that we're on track. So I think these roles will develop for us. I don't see in the short term sort of an existential crisis, because AI is can be turned off. AI doesn't work without electricity, and we have a choice. And I believe in humans making the right choice in that instance, which is, well, we're not going to create a massive crisis. This probably goes back to Elon Musk and universal credit discussions. What's going to happen in the end. We're going to make the right choices along the way. I back ourselves for that, even though it is a very black box, opaque industry. We still have a lot of good choices to make. For finance people specifically, I think it's just accepting that there is change and there's transformation, and some of these transactional roles or some of the data management roles will be automated, but it will create other jobs. We've already seen that. Generationally, we always see 40, 50%, I can't remember the percentages of jobs that have never been part of the previous generation appear. What is a podcaster, right? It didn't exist 10 years ago. So I think there are big questions, but I think as long as you're learning, as long as you're part of learning communities, you have the right sort of mindset, then it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be something that you can manage and plan in. And I would definitely lean into all of these conversations about tooling. I'm conscious that we haven't covered any of the questions that we prepped for, and this has been quite philosophical. But I'm hoping that everyone's enjoying it over a morning coffee and stroking their beards.
Yeah, I do that too much. Yeah. Okay, fine. So yeah, it's my fault. I often go into that, I guess head in the clouds, sort of more philosophical.
I enjoy it. I enjoy it.
Apologies. So let's steer it back a little bit then. So let's say that obviously there is a better place than running your business off spreadsheets, but obviously not every business can afford to go truly automated, nor do they have the time and the bandwidth at the moment to solve for the problem. So they've got to work with what they've got. So looking at that middle ground then, and I've got a couple of example tools that are kind of, I guess you could call them like powered up spreadsheets or spreadsheet add-ins. I'd love to get your view on whether you think they've got a place or whether you think they're a little bit gimmicky. So one of them relates to, I guess, your experience in data analytics.
Yep.
And the other relates to, I guess, automation and integration, right? So the first, and I forget the name of the tool, but it's basically a Google Sheets extension, right?
Yep.
And in theory, you can chain it to a machine learning algorithm to make a prediction, right? And it's as simple as saying, this is my history, so I've got 2,000 rows or whatever. Assess that along the timeline that you've got. So of course you need to have a date stamp in the spreadsheet as well. Using that data, give me some predictions, and then you can choose, I guess, the algorithm that you want to use in terms of what you want to see as the output. Yep. The question I have to you is, the feedback I tend to get when we look at some of these predictive mechanisms is that you need a decent volume of data to be able to produce anything that's vaguely accurate in terms of future predictions. So are you ever going to be able to get enough volume in a spreadsheet to be able to use an algorithm that's workable? Or do you think that there's still scope for that with a smaller data set in a spreadsheet?
So it's a good question, and I'm not a mathematician and I'm not a statistician, so I'll caveat my answer. But I have worked in analytics, and I have been on executive training for mathematics and statistics. So basically, I think what people forget when they start to bring in algorithms is that you can actually test the performance of them, because they are essentially, they're always wrong. It's just to what extent are they wrong? So you can always test the performance of an algorithm, and that is what you should be doing in this case. It's how much data is enough depends on the accuracy of the outcome. So test the performance. And this is what's happening, for everything that we know in an AI world, right? We are training the data, it's learning, it's playing it back, it's testing the data, it's improving. The algorithm accuracy is improving all the time. So the way to think about it is there any value in starting that journey with a small data set? Yes. If it's significantly wrong, then all right, you're not going to use it. But if you can continue to train that data, continue to train the algorithm, then maybe there is some value in it. But why are you doing it in the first place? If you have if you have a pretty steady pipeline, if you're doing revenue forecasting or something, the historical data is probably going to be enough of any real size of data to predict the future, because it's steady. But it's when it's volatile, or when there are complexities, different drivers as part of your revenue forecasting, let's say, when it does become more difficult. So to answer the question, yeah, I would love to play with a toy like that and see what happened. But I go back to my original comment, which was, why am I even bothering in the first place? And then know enough about the algorithm to test the performance of it. Yeah, because it's never right. It's just, the question is, how wrong is it overall?
And I suppose there, in a finance context, there are some pretty decent FP&A tools that you can get. Coming back to your point about revenue predictions, for example,
Yep.
it may be that actually just a scenario model, that you can, I guess, manually key in, I don't know, percentage uplift, or rises in cost of goods sold, or whatever it happens to be. Maybe that's a better use case. But as you say, it depends on the problem that you're solving for. But I guess
it does, and there are different tools, right? You can have, we talked about Excel. You can sort of extend out in Excel. Excel has AI. Has going all the way back. It has Monte Carlo simulation. There are algorithms, statistical models in there. But I think people sometimes forget that AI doesn't replace, it is basically statistics, right? So it just doesn't, it sounds a lot better when you say Gen AI. So I think all this stuff, it exists. It's just, what are you solving for? There's Power Query and Power BI, and like I said, Copilot's going to be part of the Microsoft stack soon. But that's all embedded in one suite of tools. You might want an external CPM tool, which this event is co-partnered with Planful. That is a CPM tool with that capability in it, would be great for it. But then you might be more comfortable, come back to the behavior change side of things. If your people are more sort of locked into an Excel mindset, then there are tools that you can embed into the ribbon of Excel, external tools, like Venner and Cube. So there, and this is kind of my, old life. So I sort of spit it out. But I always come back to the, what are you solving for? When you went down that dark hole of that AI bot, what did you forget what you were trying to do? Because if you keep hold of that, if I just want a 98% accurate revenue forecast to kind of use for a conversation starter in the business, then just do that. You don't need to be trying to sort of nail 100% accuracy or something.
Yeah, the bot was scratching an itch. So that, I guess that's what I was solving for initially, is scratching the itch. But it's, the thought behind all of that was, what if I could have like a specialized personal assistant for every part of my working day? Yeah, what if I could speed up the majority of my tasks by having a specialist AI for a certain purpose? That was the theory behind the bot, right? But as I say, it wasn't mature enough. Maybe we'll see it with GPTs when they come out, for me to continue to use that, but we'll see. The second tool, again, I think I know what your answer is going to be to this as well. So Zapier recently released something called Zapier Tables. I did a newsletter about it, but in theory, it looks like a Google Sheet if you log into Zapier Tables. So you've got your cells or whatever, but the differentiator is it is more of a database. Yeah, so it can be updated, can be synced with another data source, I guess. But the advantage of Zapier, because it's an integration platform, is you can trigger the update of a row or a column from a different application. Yeah, so every time I make a Stripe payment, for example, add a new row to the table, for example, for an audit trail, for example, that's just something off the top of my head that I might think about. But on the other side, you can also chain some sort of integration that could trigger a workflow. Yeah, so for example, if somebody adds a table, or if somebody modifies a row, and this is where I went into budgeting territory, in terms of keeping everybody on the same page for budget modifications, if we're looking at budget lines, trigger an alert in Slack, for example, to let somebody know that a change has been made to a row or a column, for example. Yeah. So my question to you is, do you think that sort of tool has a place, or in adding something like that, are we just adding complexity for the sake of complexity? Do we again need to go back to what we're solving for, and don't think about how many integration steps do we need to get to the end result? Do we need to think of an alternative, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm not going to repeat myself, but that is important, right? Just remembering what we're aiming for. I think there is a place for that sort of tool. There is a place for anything that can help you integrate. But I think but it's cost benefit in my head. So, I think if you talk to a CIO, like they in an enterprise, right? They might have Zapier, because they have an ERP system, but their ERP system is a legacy ERP system, and it's not perfect. They might have SaaS product that fits in all around that. But then there may be these sort of point things that we want to do with the business. Our citizen developers are out there, doing their thing. And that low code, no code environment like Zapier can help enable that kind of outcome, whatever it is, reporting, let's say. So I think there is a place for it. I think what my advice would be, though, is to make sure, if you are buying these licenses, if you are buying any sort of this stuff at scale, that you got the visibility and you can track it. Because I think there's a lot of hidden spend in these areas. And at some point, you're going to outgrow that kind of, not no code. You're going to outgrow that type of integration. And you mentioned this sort of CPM, FP&A tools. These are hyper connected tools now. They probably can connect with everything because they built a standard API and off they go. So I think they are valid, those sorts of low code integration tools. But at some point, I think you need to check them, have the visibility of the spend, and maybe start thinking, well, I'm outgrowing that now. But I think they're great. I started looking at Zapier, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it's a great product. But would I want to grow a business with that sort of integration going on? Probably not for my financial reporting that I needed to be sort of robust. I would move that onto a more developed tool.
Yeah, make.com is another good one. What it used to be called, the name escapes me. Something I'm thinking Integramat or something like that. I can't remember, but it's been around for a while. But they had a rebrand. Now it's make.com. The thing that I loved about that is it was really easy to start building in AI into your workflow. So I basically had an email triage with an AI summary tied to Google. Yeah. So yeah, sometimes there's also a personal advantage, even if you're not using these tools in a business, to speed up your own workflow that I found quite interesting with some of these low code tools. But again, you've just got to be aware of the time that you invest in these, because as I do, you can lose days to this sort of stuff and not really have much to show for it.
Yeah, but I am a huge advocate of the sort of test and learn approach and starting small. I just think you need to, be careful with your time.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow I'm doing a session on the digital finance function, right, which is kind of how you sort of create a digital finance function strategy, and in there it's about gradually bringing in the right tools. It's not about bringing in, I don't know, an LLM and putting it on a server and getting all your data in there and bringing in a prompt engineer tomorrow. It's about taking people on a journey. And you said it yourself, it's bleeding edge technology. You're losing blood on that bleeding edge technology. There's only so long you can actually stay with it. Yeah. So I would sort of maybe look at that side of life as the edge, sort of limited time project, because there's so much else that we can do. I hate to say it, I joked about manual invoices, but the pandemic showed us that there were so many people who were still reliant on paper because they were sending people into the office to collect stuff, against government advice, right? That was only a couple of years ago. So I think the AI world can sort of, we can lose sight of all of the small wins and the established and mature tools that are already there. And let's be very curious about the AI sort of edge tech, bleed tech.
Mm.
But let's just, let's have a strategic approach to it, which doesn't mean a slow approach. It just means, that a joined up approach.
Yeah, and I think, and we've discussed this before, AI is one of those that will make its way into the applications that we use every day anyway. So I think people don't need to stress too much. I think people understand how it works and know how to interact with it. It gives you an advantage because you can go into any AI advancements knowing exactly how to speak to AI, for example. And I do firmly believe that people who know how to speak to AI as well as they know how to speak to people, will have an advantage over people that are just winging it, for example. But I think
it's that classic comment recently, it's not AI that will take your job. It's the people who know how to use AI that might take your job.
Absolutely. But in terms of systems, I don't think, and maybe this is controversial, but I don't think much has changed in terms of applications for different use cases. And I'm conscious of time. We will wrap up in time. But businesses start, at the bottom end, they might have like Sage 50, Xero, QuickBooks or whatever, and they might have some spreadsheets, right? It's kind of the way that every business starts. But what we're now seeing is, as we've mentioned, there are maybe some ways that you can supercharge spreadsheets and maybe not have them in isolation to the point where you create in a ton of different versions, right? Yeah. So maybe you have Xero and a Zapier table or something like that, because you're not at that scale or have that complexity that warrants any investment further than that. I think it, of course, depends on the business model and the complexity. Obviously, I see businesses all the time that can use like something like a Xero and a Fathom for forever and a day without ever needing to change because their business just isn't that complex. And there's no reason why you need to overcomplicate things if you don't need to. But as we've mentioned, sometimes you can get away with scaling to a decent level by having a low-code integration platform. Yeah, so that could be a dedicated finance system for GL plus an integration to a CRM system plus an integration to an FP&A tool and what that happens to be. But then there will eventually come a point where you do need to take that next level in condensing and saying, right, well, what systems can cover a lot of this stuff? And I will just reiterate again that I still think that ERP implementations, even at an enterprise level now, are still becoming more best of breed type applications because there's more solutions on the market now. So less and less solutions are doing a bit of everything. We're seeing solutions that are becoming more specialist in certain areas. So we've got FP&A tools specifically for e-commerce businesses, for example. So I think there will be scope for these more point solutions in the enterprise space. I just think that the way that they interact with each other is going to get better and better.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not. I think ERPs used to be seen as a sort of master of all. Then it turned into a master of none, and now it's maybe coming back a little bit. But there's just so much good technology out there. So much data savvy business users now. Citizen developers, citizen data scientists. All these people who want to work in this area. So I think that is changing how people want to consume technology. But I want to leave people with this comment, right? Which we talked a lot about the technology, and I love what you're doing with your podcast. But going back to the top, if you don't know what you're aiming for, you don't know what boat to get on because you don't know which destination you're going to. So you've really got to nail that first. You talked about the change management piece. The people side of things is equally as important as the tech. We can talk about tech as much as you want, and you'll find a small group of people who will chase that with you. But if you really want wholesale change, we've got to be probably putting an equal amount of effort on the people as we are on the technology. And to your point, just that you said about, at some point we might have an infrastructure that needs to be changed or scaled. You've got to nail your processes before you get to that point. So, there's a lot of people who, might be happy with their infrastructure, but they've never looked at their processes properly. They're just implied. So you start stretching those and scaling those and they break. Yeah. So I actually think that technology should be the very last conversation that we have, even though we've been having a great conversation about tech, because there's so much to do. Yeah, and that's why I want to leave people with that comment from me, which is, you know, do not start by buying licenses for tech when you have no idea what you want to do with it. But it can be inspirational, so you can play with it and you can, you know, inspire people from using technology. So do it for that reason. But you know, there is a whole load of pain out there if you are just buying tech for tech's sake. And I hope that doesn't go down badly with your audience.
No, no, not at all. You know, and we do speak about it, but I think you're bob on. You know, it's pointless if you don't have a direction. So the direction comes first. What do you want to achieve as a business? But there's no point in having a direction as a business if you don't have the people that are going to support that. You know, there's no point in having good people if they don't have a decent process to follow, because they'll become lost. And without the process, you can't implement the tech, because you know you're trying to essentially create something from nothing, you know, and then the onus becomes the tech. You know, it's the tech that's wrong, and you know, oh, we don't want to use this system anymore because it doesn't work. It's not necessarily because it doesn't work, it's because you didn't assess the tech against the process well enough in making that decision. But either way, all four of those elements, no amount of AI is going to help you with that. You know, that the AI will enhance each of those stages, so hopefully it'll make people better. You know, hopefully it'll enhance the tech, but you still need to get the other variables right first. But no, we do need to wrap up. So really appreciate you coming on, Chris. Great to be part of the event, and hopefully we can catch up soon.
Thank you, Adam. I do appreciate it, and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's great. Definitely an advocate of technology conversations, and the more that we can get into the ecosystem and help people find good tech, the better. So thanks again.
No worries at all. Thanks, Chris. See you later.